welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranston. This week, a special Michigan Maritime Policy panel convened to talk about maritime strategy and possibilities in Michigan. It's not always at the top of people's list when they think about transportation. Obviously, everybody thinks about roads. Some people care about other important modes of transportation, including transit and rail. But Michigan's waterways, being a Great Lakes state, surrounded by 4 of the 5, is also always front of mind for people who deal in the delivery of freight. So I wanted to hear what came out of that panel and what the strategy is going forward and just what's going on with maritime policy in Michigan. Alicia Wolf is the MDOT planner who coordinates these activities and oversees the maritime office and strategy. So first I spoke with her about her perceptions and challenges and what she does in her work and what came out of that panel discussion. And after that, I spoke with John Peracchio, who is a State Transportation Commission member and a veteran guest of the podcast. He moderated the panel discussion, and he has a real interest in this topic too. And he had some interesting things to say. So I hope you enjoy the conversations. So again, as mentioned in the introduction, I'm with Alicia Wolf, who oversees, among other things related to freight coordination at MDOT, what we're doing with maritime. I should say what we're doing and what we hope to be doing. Alicia, thanks for being here. First time on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. It's a pleasure to be here.
So talk first a little bit about your career trajectory, what you did to get to where you are now.
Sure. So I can't say I ever thought I would be doing freight transportation when I went to urban and regional planning at Michigan State University. Started with MDOT around 10 and a half years ago as a entry-level transportation planner, and quickly learned that one of my colleagues that I had the privilege of shadowing for 4 years was looking to retire, and they really needed somebody to absorb some of that freight and maritime knowledge that he had developed over a 30-year career. So I sort of landed into freight and maritime, and fortunately, I absolutely love it. I find it to be very interesting and engaging, and a very different area, a unique focus area that MDOT gets to work on. So that's how I got here, and I feel pretty fortunate that I get to interact with the stakeholder groups that I do.
So talk about that a little bit. What is it that you wouldn't have known before that you learned and has kind of stoked your passions?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think when I talk to people who work in maritime, especially, they are folks who grew up watching freighters, visiting the Soo locks and watching vessels go through the locks. And that's not something I had the opportunity to do as a young person or even as a young adult. It was very new to me what the freight industry did. And, I think the general public, much like me, knows that they can go to the grocery store and pick up their goods, and they're just simply there. And we don't understand how they got there and what that progress looks like, getting something from, where it's produced to where we purchase and use these goods. So I never understood that connection. And I now very much get to understand and interact with a lot of the different groups that are involved in movement of freight.
Yeah, there's definitely a community of I guess I'd call them freighter files, or maybe there's another term for what they are. But if you spend any time, if you lived in a landlocked environment and spend any time in a harbor town, I've seen it in Holland and Grand Haven and Manistee. I worked for a few years in Sandusky, Ohio, and it was definitely a phenomenon there that every evening a lot of people will come down to the docks to watch these freighters come in. So yes. It's really interesting.
Indeed, yes.
So talk a little bit about what we're doing with this maritime office. We can get into one of the biggest challenges, which is trying to find a sustainable funding source. But before we talk about that, what are your hopes and dreams for this?
That's a great question, Jeff. I have a lot of hopes and dreams for maritime, especially, and really maritime
as one does.
as one does, for sure. I think maritime is really having a moment right now, really in Michigan and nationally. And it's something that's really exciting for us to see. We're seeing, renewed interest in domestic supply chains, resiliency, making better use of the infrastructure we have. And it's really, really cool to be one small part of where the industry is going. But I'm part of a larger interagency group that came together to develop the Michigan Maritime Strategy, which the state of Michigan put out last week. And that came out of having ongoing meetings between the various state agencies and understanding that we were all working on different things as it related to maritime. And wouldn't it be great, we thought, to come together and really have a strategic vision and outline of where we want to be in Michigan with regard to maritime in the next 10 years. So that is how it came about. And now last week we put out the maritime strategy, and we are going to now move into implementation of that strategy and be able to work together with the industry in Michigan to implement some of the goals and objectives we have in the plan.
So before we get into, and I want to talk a little bit more about the strategy itself, but when you feel like freight is having a moment, maritime transport of freight specifically, why do you think that is? Is that because of things going on in the trucking industry, or it's a whole bunch of things?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. I think freight and maritime is something that occurs behind the scenes a lot of the time. And I think the awareness is starting to increase. And the more that we are hearing industry talk in public and at various, associations and stakeholder events, we're starting to gain a better understanding of what the industry is doing, why it is mattered. And one of the remarks I heard from a panelist, we'll talk a little bit about the Michigan Maritime Policy Panel that we held yesterday, but one of the remarks I heard from a panelist was that maritime comes and goes in the night. It drops off bulk commodities and, iron ore, limestone, sand, and a lot of the public doesn't even know they were there. It happened while they slept. And it's something that I believe now we're starting to really get a better handle on. This is a backbone of Michigan's economy, and this is why it matters. And this is how goods are moved. And this is why you're able to have the things that you have in your home and your work and be able to purchase those items.
It's kind of cool to think about the thread of history here, right? That long before the invention of the internal combustible engine and all the transportation technology that we have now, hundreds of years ago, waterways were how we transported people and things. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. So when you say it's kind of having a moment, it's a bit of a comeback story, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of these vessels are 40 to 70 years old. This is not, new technology. This has been here for a long time. And it's, like many other pieces of our infrastructure, when we're talking transportation, this is aging infrastructure that's needs continued investment to continue to serve our economy.
Okay. And that kind of brings us to the strategy, right? A big part of that strategy is how to get that. I used the term sustainable earlier, and I don't know that there's a better word for what you're talking about, but that continued investment. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we see among the various Great Lakes states the different types of investment, and those states having the ability to invest in different ways, and ownership of these facilities varying among the states. And in Michigan, much of this infrastructure is owned by the private sector. We have two public port authorities in Michigan. The rest of our 33 cargo ports are privately owned and operated. In some states, this is similar. In other states, like ports of Indiana, the majority of them are publicly owned. So you see different states and agencies are able to invest in different ways depending on what that structure looks like. But we haven't, in our history, had a dedicated grant program or revenue source to fund maritime transportation. So we were able to put out a one-time $5 million grant program in fiscal year 2024 to 5 Michigan ports. And that's something we hope to you'd be able to continue, but without as you said, reliable revenue source. It is difficult to identify how future programs like that could be funded. And it's a need that we feel strongly about, and the ports certainly feel there's a dire need to invest in some of this aging infrastructure of their docks or seawalls, the vessels themselves in many cases. So it's an ongoing conversation, but without that, there's some federal sources, grant programs, but there's no dedicated formula funding for maritime.
Yeah, funding is a challenge in all modes of transportation. That's just the fact. It's especially true in Michigan, but it's true everywhere. But when you talk about, I know one thing that always gets people going is that sense of competition. And when you talk about what other states are doing, none of the other so-called Great Lakes states actually have frontage on 4 of the 5, as Michigan does. So are our neighbors doing better on this front than we are?
I think some programs have had a lot longer standing programs that they've identified where those funds should come from. Some are legislatively appropriated, some are carved out within their transportation budgets. But I think it depends on the sophistication of the program. Again, it depends on the makeup of jurisdiction of those ports and marine terminals. And in some cases, we do have some catching up to do, but we feel we're really well positioned given, like you said, geographically, the Great Lakes system, and we have a lot of capacity, and we have the ability to, I think, fill some of those needs in a unique way that other Midwest states are not able to.
So one thing that would be appealing to people, everybody complains about trucks, right? And we know in terms of not just the congestion and what having more trucks on the road does from an environmental aspect, there's also just a safety issue of the interaction between smaller vehicles and trucks. With a more robust maritime program, would that take some trucks off the road?
Absolutely. Yes. They've got some tremendous figures that the American Great Lakes Port Association of just how many, based on how many tonnage of goods that you're moving, we would see a significant reduction of truck congestion if we were able to divert some of these movements to the water. And that's one of the things that we're trying to better get a handle on, just how much could we divert and what commodities make the most sense, and where is there a business case to make those switches happen. We're looking into some research projects through MDOT's research program for fiscal year 27 to 29 to take a look at just that, as where would it make sense to divert some of the traffic to the water, where, as I said, it's not competing with other users, no blocked rail crossings, no trucks on the road. So really a clean and seamless way of transporting goods.
Let's talk a little bit about the panel this week. What did you find? I mean, you knew the topics going in probably better than anybody in the room, but what surprised you, or what did you find particularly interesting in the discussion?
In my 10 years of working in freight or maritime, that was really the first venue that I've seen all of those individual sectors in one room together, having this larger conversation and sharing why this matters to Michigan and why now, after all these years, are we having this conversation. And it was really just tremendous to hear some of the progress we're making at the ports and in some of the ways that we're developing workforce. And I think it was really just truly heartwarming that we are all coming together and there's real, bipartisan support for maritime and the ways that it supports our transportation system and our economy. And we know that maritime is one of our greatest strengths and one of our state's competitive advantages to having that asset and being surrounded by the Great Lakes and 3,200 miles of shoreline, 33 active cargo ports. So to me, it was just a great opportunity to sit back and soak in how far we've come after many years of hearing these messages myself from the ports, but giving them the opportunity to share that with the legislature and other state agencies and members of the public.
Yeah, that was a very good cross-section in the room in terms of representation. Did you feel like for the lawmakers and other policymakers that were there, who were probably the most important audience, that there were some light bulb moments perhaps?
I do. And I think they're starting to recognize that if they themselves had very little understanding of what the maritime system looked like, being in the positions that they are, then boy, the public has that often same level of understanding. So we're all starting from a similar place and baseline of, if we can start getting the message out and educating and increasing awareness, they think, a little bit could go a long ways within their jurisdictions. And it's just really exciting to see how they think that there's a great alignment between all of the state agencies and the goals we have as greater state of Michigan.
Yeah, that's really well said. Thank you, Alicia, for taking time to share this. Is there anything else that you want to add?
No. Thanks for the opportunity, Jeff, and for helping get the maritime message out. And I'm happy to return and talk anytime about maritime in Michigan.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate how much you love your work. I'll be back in a minute to talk to John Peracchio, who is a State Transportation Commission member and also moderated the panel that Alicia has been talking about, and we'll get his perspectives and thoughts. So thanks again, Alicia.
Thank you, Jeff.
Please stay tuned. We'll be back with more Talking Michigan Transportation right after this.
Oh, look at those beautiful wildflowers along the road. Aren't they pretty?
Check out that classic car. You don't see many of those anymore.
Wow, look at that cable median barrier.
What? You mean that wire guardrail in the middle of the road?
Exactly. Aren't they gorgeous?
Not exactly.
They were put there to prevent crossover head-on crashes, which are some of the most deadly type of freeway crashes. And they're really effective, reducing those types of incidents by 90%. That's a lot of lives that have been saved.
Huh. I guess I never really looked at them like that. I prefer the wildflowers. But I'm seeing those median cable barriers in a whole new light.
So once again, as promised, John Peracchio, who is now a regular on the podcast, he's just about to qualify for a 5-time jacket, I think. John, recently ensconced as a state transportation commissioner, has tremendous interest in all things transportation. I think, is it unfair to call you a transportation geek?
I don't like geek, but, maven maybe is.
All right.
Yeah, I'll be a maven for you, Jeff.
Okay. Not a mogul, but a maven.
Maven.
John is a transportation maven, and he is here to talk about the maritime strategy and what the state is doing in that realm, and about a panel that he moderated this week. So I talked to Alicia Wolf earlier, John, and my biggest takeaway from her about the timing of this and why we've kind of reached some critical mass, she said, maritime is having a minute. So sounds like you agree with that. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, fundamentally, it's because the state of Michigan in January, much to my pleasant surprise, issued a maritime strategy. I mean, here we are, 2 peninsulas surrounded on 3 sides by water, but we really don't consider the Great Lakes to be a transportation resource, at least until now. And I will say the strategy goes well beyond transportation to talk about the opportunities for economic development associated with things like shipbuilding, ship operations, and very significantly, what we can do to improve our ports and other facilities that are appurtenant to water.
Would you say this has been building for some time? I mean, I talked to Alicia a little bit about how, for all the technology from the internal combustible engine and development of other kinds of transportation over the past 100 years or so, we were moving people and goods by water hundreds of years ago. So is this like one of those things that goes around and comes around again, and a realization that, water is a great means of moving goods?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think we can look at the auto industry in particular, which is very, very important to our state's economy, and see that a lot of completed vehicles and components for vehicles are currently transported by water. It's just happening on the east and west coast. It's not necessarily happening through the St. Lawrence Seaway. So a lot of, for example, automotive components come from Europe and elsewhere, and they start in the maritime provinces of Canada, go through Quebec, Ontario, Michigan, okay? And then both completed vehicles as well as other components go from Michigan back through through Canada, but then through Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey. The ports of New York, New Jersey, and Baltimore are very, very important, and increasingly the port of Savannah in Georgia, which is supplying the auto industry that exists in southeastern United States. And so when you start to think about the art of the possible, when you're moving a lot of stuff, a lot of it is heavy, and you can achieve great efficiency by moving all of that via ships and on the water.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I learned just last week that a cable stay bridge in Savannah is actually going to be raised by 25 feet so that it can accommodate the larger freighters and the containers that stack up on those. I don't know if you knew about that or not, but it's a $170 million project to actually, loosen the cables and raise this bridge by 25 feet.
So I honestly, I didn't know about it, but it makes perfect sense, right? Because it enables, more containers on ships that are designed to handle these things stacked up, certain distances, and so you have to have clearance. I mean, I think, the truth is in our area, particularly the Port of Monroe, I mean, there's nothing in the way of bringing, major container ships into that port.
So when you talk about the role of Canada in this, both coming and going, is that mostly the Port of Halifax?
Yeah, Halifax. The stuff comes in there, gets on trucks, right? The containers go on trucks.
Yeah.
Okay. You can put a lot of containers on a container ship. And instead of those trucks being on roadways, the containers can be shipped via waterway.
So how do we talk about this I want to get to funding in a minute, but without sounding like we're pitting, one industry against another in terms of maritime and trucking?
There's a concept which I just learned about it was before the panel. Somebody gave me this this really interesting slide on what's called short sea shipping. You can't say that real quickly multiple times, but if you just do it slowly, short sea shipping of containers, what it means is it actually uses the trucking mode more efficiently by combining. It's an intermodal concept where you combine moving containers short distances on water to points where they can connect with trucks that take those containers to the ultimate destination. So it isn't displacing trucking. It's just using the trucks more efficiently over shorter distances and using ships over shorter distances.
So it's rethinking their role.
It's common elsewhere, right? It's just we don't think of it that way. And that's, part of the, historical importance in this year of our nation's semi-quincentennial, that Michigan has now at least an outline of what we can do to leverage our tremendous water resources.
I talked to Alicia a little bit about this, and I want to get your perspective too, because you talked about, being surrounded by water on three sides. And when we talk about the Great Lakes states, ours is the only one that has frontage on 4 of those 5 Great Lakes. But where do we rank against those states in funding maritime and having a long-term strategy.
Well, now we have a strategy, so that's good. On funding, we're less good. Other states are doing more, and that's the challenge for us, is to find a stable funding mechanism that isn't a one-off, that can cross fiscal years and doesn't deplete funding for other critical transportation needs.
Yeah. So do you think that will work? That kind of, you talked about rethinking the efficiency of the movement and the shorter trips. You think that's something that will become a concept more people are talking about and understand?
Well, I certainly hope
that's
so.
the whole idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. I certainly hope so. And I think, part of the efficiency can go toward supporting our water infrastructure, our port infrastructure. Okay. In other words, what I'm saying is, if the private sector can save money by using the waterways as a transportation resource, I think it's fair that part of that efficiency can be captured as, let's call it a user fee, to be able to support the development of ports and shore infrastructure.
You've heard me use this analogy before, but I think it bears repeating here because so much of this strategy discussion involves a sustainable funding method. If I went to Boyne Mountain, I just use that as an example because I'm a skier, and said, I want to pay a 1994 price for a lift ticket because that's the last time the federal gas tax was raised. And they said, well, sorry, we can't do that. We have a business here. But so many people think the solution to funding is just finding something in what you already get instead of expanding the pool, right? And so now this discussion about maritime is, well, we'll take some money from here and put it here, instead of, we just need more money overall for all the modes. Did you sense any breakthroughs in terms of that yesterday with the policymakers who were in the room?
I did not. I think it seemed to me that we're still in a zero-sum game of having to take from other transportation needs in terms of providing funding for maritime. I don't think that's a good answer. I will say this: I commend the governor and the legislature for providing money to do a road usage charge study and pilot, something we've talked about on your podcast. And that speaks to the need to find alternative funding mechanisms for transportation. Now, in this particular case, the Budget Act specifies that we're looking at roads and bridges, but the concept could go beyond that to support other modes of transportation in the state, such as transit. But going back to my earlier comment, I think user fees are certainly something we need to take a look at if we're able to capture cost efficiencies by building up our port infrastructure.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, and maybe, God knows so many things about so many things, but if you don't know this, that's fine. But are other states being more effective at identifying that user fee model when it comes to maritime?
They certainly are. I think it's just so different in other parts of the country because we're so underdeveloped, and we very much appreciate the legislature providing the $5.3 million that's going to roll over from the fiscal year 26 to fiscal year 27 for a grant program, and that's very, very important. But we're going to need much more. And that's barely a drop in the bucket, as some have said, and I agree with that. But we need to look at alternative funding sources really to make this work in Michigan. We're starting. In one sense, it's a good thing. We're starting from scratch. We really have an opportunity here to do something innovative, leverage technology. Look at unmanned surface transportation, especially because you've got these great bathtubs of the Great Lakes that are in a relatively controlled compared to an ocean environment. And in fact, you sparked another area of opportunity, which is to support commercial and military shipbuilding, because we are in an enclosed and secure area. So for example, U.S. Navy research and development, the Great Lakes are absolutely ideal because our adversaries can't get in here, right? It's literally impossible. And I don't know if you know this, but in World War II, the U.S. Navy actually trained aircraft carrier pilots on the Great Lakes. There were two aircraft carriers, USS Wolverine and USS Sable. They were converted paddle wheel commercial steamers, okay? And the U.S. Navy throughout World War II trained their pilots on the Great Lakes. It's a great example of how our natural resources can support national security.
I did know a little bit about that because of a Navy uncle of mine in Battle Creek who talked about that, and also talked about other things related to Michigan's role in World War II, and including the advantages of our cloudy days here. So,
well, yeah, right. But I mean, the other thing is, the Navy right now is struggling they don't seem to be able to build a ship to save their soul. They've got all kinds of manufacturing issues. Do you know who knows more about manufacturing on Earth than the people in Michigan who've done it for over a century, right?
Yeah.
We absolutely can help the Navy. We can help commercial shipbuilders, which are also struggling. Okay. And it's not that we're going to build ships here in Michigan necessarily, although ultimately we could. But, the Navy, for example, is building ships in modules. So we can build those modules here, put them on a container ship, and take them to where the ships are actually being assembled. So there's a huge opportunity, and it's outlined in the maritime strategy that Alicia helped write.
So we've established that you're a transportation maven, but what is it about this that so specifically, sparks your interest, I guess? Is it your background with naval issues, or just all of that?
As you know, I'm a civilian. I never served, but I'm a lifelong Navy Leaguer, Navy League of the United States. I belong to the U.S. Naval Institute. And I'm what they call a regional director for the U.S. Naval War College Foundation in Newport, Rhode Island. And, when I visit naval facilities, I was recently at a conference in Norfolk, Virginia, which is just a ginormous U.S. Navy base and operations center. And I look at the coastline and the shore facilities, and I think of Michigan. There's no reason. I mean, we're not going to be Norfolk, but we certainly could be more than we are in terms of, both commercial and military port facilities. And we should be thinking about that. And I've always thought, wow, what a missed opportunity we have on the Great Lakes to participate in the both commercial shipping and then in supporting national defense.
Well, John, we could talk about this forever. As always, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate that you're willing to give your talent and time to our state to do these things. And it's always a great conversation. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. Again, I think this is historic. And, to Alicia's point about maritime having its minute, I'm hoping it's going to be more like hours and days, because it's really worth it, and I ultimately a great benefit to the residents of Michigan.
We hope so too. Well said. Thank you. I'd like to thank you once more for tuning in to Talking Michigan Transportation. You can find show notes and more on Apple Podcasts or Buzzsprout. I also want to acknowledge the talented people who help make this a reality each week, starting with Randy Debler, who skillfully edits the audio, Jesse Ball, who proofs the content, and Jackie Salinas, who posts the podcast to various platforms and transcribes the audio to make it accessible to all.